everyone, what's up and welcome back. In my last video, the AuthorTube newbie tag video, I mentioned that I had begun working on a fantasy series and that I wanted to document my journey of that with you guys. So if you want to know what my fantasy series is about, how I came up with the story, and how I'm planning it, stick around. So number one, what is this series about and what is this world that I'm creating? Great question. I have no fucking idea how to answer that though. Seriously, I don't know how to answer that. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. First off, from here on out, I'll be referring to the fantasy series under its working title, The Ruined Archways. In the world that I'm creating, there are these ancient archways and they're huge set pieces in the series. I'm not sure if that title is going to stick, or if it's just going to be the title for the first book and the series will have a different name, or if it's just a throwaway title altogether and both the series and the first book will be called something different. But I figure things like the individual book title and the series title will just finalize themselves as I get further along in the planning and drafting process. The series is set in its own world, but aesthetically I picture it to be reminiscent of ancient Greece or ancient Rome. I'm not a historian, so I don't really know the difference between the two, but the Romans just stole everything from the Greeks anyway, right? I should probably do a little bit more research before I start writing this. Do more research on ancient Greece, ancient Rome. Anyway, ancient Greece, ancient Rome aesthetic. This summer, I was in Italy for work, and on one of my days off, I got to visit the ruins of Pompeii, and it was insane. I don't really know what I was expecting. I guess part of the reason why I went was just to say that I had gone, but when I got there, I was blown away. I had gotten up kind of late that day, and so I had to take a ferry to a train, and from the train station in Pompeii, I had to walk to the park where the actual ruins were at. And because of all this traveling and public transportation, I told myself I was only going to be there for 2 hours because I didn't want to miss my ferry back to the town where I was actually staying. But I ended up walking around Pompeii for 4 hours. I actually ended up missing my ferry. Luckily there was another one though that wasn't even on the schedules board, which I imagine was probably just for locals or idiots like me who'd missed the last ferry. But anyway, I spent 4 hours walking around these ruins. I was so enamored. The amount of detail, the architecture, the art. It filled me with this creative energy that I didn't even know how to express then, because that summer I was so wrapped up with getting things ready for my debut novella. But I knew that trip was important, and I knew it was going to circle around and come back to me in some way. So enter The Ruined Archways. This series started as just the merest hint of an idea. I was feeling really salty about the ending to Game of Thrones, and I wanted more. I wanted to create something for myself. I wanted to write an epic fantasy series. Fantasy was always that genre when I was a kid that I always envisioned myself writing. Even when I was 6 years old watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch on Friday nights, I knew I always wanted to write fantasy. It's been on my bucket list forever. And with the disappointment that was the series end to Thrones, I figured it was time for me to check off that item from my bucket list. Due to my saltiness over the Game of Thrones ending, one of the first things that I had for my series was my MC, my main character, or at least one of my main characters. I knew I wanted her to be a woman, RIP Mother of Dragons, hashtag Daenerys deserved better, and I knew that I wanted her to be a hero. So great, I have a woman, I know I want her to be a hero, what else? I knew that I wanted my MC to find love. She's gonna be a hero, she deserves to be loved. And I really like the setup of Thrones where all of the characters had their own individual stories before coming together at the very end. So right away, I knew a multi-point of view setup for the series was necessary. I wasn't quite sure how many POVs I would have, but I knew there was going to be at least more than 2. The world I want to create is vast, so I know that I'm going to need multiple point of view characters in order to explore that world in detail. Okay, so far, I know I have a female MC, I know that she's going to be a hero, I know she's going to have a love interest who's going to come in at some point in the series. I know he's going to be one of the protagonists along with a few other characters. Now what? I knew early on that I wanted this story to make a statement. I wanted to say something with it. Because when you have a huge overarching story like this, if you don't have specific themes in mind, I feel like the story can sometimes get lost within the grandness of the world. You lose something really important. It's not about the story anymore. It's about cool set pieces, big effects, sexy scenes. You lose the story. So I thought about what kind of themes and stories appeal to me. And I finally found one that really struck me and stuck with me. I realized I wanted to tell a story about struggle. But not just a story about an underdog who moves up in the world and becomes a hero. I wanted to tell a story about someone who was functioning in her world. Maybe she was even supportive of the system that she was a part of, but I wanted her to become disenchanted by it, betrayed by the system that she previously bought into. And this betrayal would then cause her to rebel against it. Because I've been there, and I think a lot of people have been there too, where you grow up believing in someone or something, and then one day you realize, this is wrong. Everything I believe is wrong. But I think that's a pretty universal thing. Disenchantment, disillusionment with previously held beliefs, and sometimes it can be kind of painful to let that thing go. But you know that you have to because it's either not good for you or not good for someone else. So I knew I wanted to incorporate this kind of universal theme into the story, especially with my female main character and especially with the first book. I've got the first book kind of mapped out so far, not quite planned, but a few major events. Okay, so I've got my main character, or main characters, I've got the setting and aesthetic, and I've got a few major themes that I want to explore, at least in the first book. Great. Now what? Well, as I stated in my newbie tag video, I've never written fantasy before. This is my first time. So I have no idea if I'm going about this the right way. I could be doing it all wrong. But I started with my villain or villains. After I had all of the other things I mentioned nailed down, I needed to know who my heroes were going up against. Again, is this how you're supposed to write and play in a fantasy series? I have no idea, but this is just what made the most sense to me. So the questions I began asking myself were, who are my villains? Just one or more than one? Why are they villainous? What's their backstory? What's their deal? Because I think a villain should have a more important purpose than they just want to destroy the world. Voldemort, I think, is a great villain because he's real. He was a young person. He was a child. He went through shit. And we see that descent. We see where his need and desire for power come from. We know why he hates muggles. We know where his prejudices come from, what they turned into, and how he weaponized them. The Harry Potter series is by no means perfect, but I think one of the brilliant things about it is how relatable Voldemort is, because we've seen people like him in our own world. So that was important to me. I didn't just want generic supervillain for my series. I wanted them to be more than that. And I wanted their endgame, whatever that endgame may be, to have a purpose. Why are they doing what they're doing? What are my villains' motivations? I went through quite a few iterations of villains to figure this out too. I had several different potential villains, all with different backgrounds, desires, motivations, before I finally found one that fit. It's kind of funny. It reminds me of this great short story a friend of mine wrote, where the main character is a writer and she's looking for villains for her story. So she holds interviews for villains in this office space. It was basically like that. Yes. What are your qualifications? I see you specialize in necromancy, but how's your aim with an ice spear? Sorry. That's the last Game of Thrones reference, I promise. So I have my villain, or villains. I'm not telling yet. I have my setting, I have my main characters, and I have at least one major theme. Now what? Next, I knew because of the theme that I wanted to explore with the story, I had to nail down my world society and class structure. And I also knew that I needed to nail down the major religion. And I knew there were other things about this world that I knew I needed to nail down as well. What are the politics of this world? What is the government system that's in place? What are some relevant in-universe historical events that come into play in my story? What's the story's timeline? When and over a period of how long does the story take place? Who are the other major characters? What are their character arcs? What are their relationships to each other? What are the major events of book one? What are the major events of all the books in the series? How many books are in the series? What's an appropriate length? And for the love of God, what is my fucking magic system? I swear, that last one has hung me up for literally months, and I still haven't quite nailed it down. I had no idea writing a magic system would be this involved. Like, it's one thing to say, I'm gonna write a story with magic in it, but it's a completely other experience to actually go and do it. What does the magic look like? Who has magic? How does society view the magic? Is it frowned upon? Is it celebrated? Is it normal? Is it kept secret? Is it passed down through certain families, or is it random? Or can everyone do it? What is the scope of this magic? What all can it do? Are there different magic systems? What is the source of magic? How does one perform magic? Wands, staffs, spells, weird hand movements. Are there costs to this magic system? As Brandon Sanderson would say, what are the costs, weaknesses, and limitations of the magic? And like, how the fuck am I supposed to know all of this? I knew early on that my world would include magic because, duh, it's a fantasy, it has to have magic. And there are two specific instances in the first book where I knew I wanted to write magic happening. But these two displays of magic that I had thought of for these scenes, which I think are integral to the story, are not related. They're two completely different types of magic. And when I did my research on magic systems, this bothered me because I didn't want to create a story where magic just solved all the problems and was a plot device where it needed to be. Because that's fucking dumb and it's bad storytelling. Even if it was a soft magic system and there was a problem that was solved by magic, I wanted there to be a reason for it. I didn't just want something to show up in my story without enough foreshadowing and explanation and have it feel like it came out of nowhere and ultimately be unsatisfying for my potential audience. Looking at you again, Game of Thrones. Seriously, what the fuck was the point? Sorry guys, I swear, that's the last time. But anyway, that's where I'm at. I have my setting, I have my major characters, I have one of the major themes, and I have my villain or villains, but that does not a fantasy world make. I'm still nailing down the society and class structure, the religion, the government, the economy, and the magic system, along with other major storytelling elements. The B characters, the relationships, the major plot points, all of that. But though I know I have a lot of planning ahead of me before I can even start writing this story, I feel good about what I have so far. And I'm proud of what I've come up with and the progress that I've made on this story. And maybe in my next video or the video after that, I'll share more with you guys about this world I'm creating. See you guys next time.